Welcome back to Account Management Secrets. Here's the thing. Every account manager is told to ask great questions, to dig deep. But what happens when the client doesn't engage? Maybe they're too busy, they're unprepared, or they're simply not in the mood. How do you earn the right to dig deeper, to do that important discovery without sounding pushy or losing credibility with your customer? That's what we're tackling today with Richard Harris, founder of the Harris Consulting Group and author of The Seller's Journey. Richard is an expert in building trust, handling tough conversations, and uncovering what really drives our customers' success. In today's episode, we cover practical strategies to break through disengagement, how to uncover your client's true priorities, and how to navigate objections and tough timelines. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Richard Harris. Richard, thanks so much for joining me on the show. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Alex. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Now, I wanted to start off, we're just going to get into it, but I wanted to start off with a question that comes up a lot for account managers. You know, we're told that it's really important to discover our customers' needs and figure out what their challenges and pain points are and ask great discovery questions and, do voice of customer interviews and stuff like that. And so we're always being pressed as account managers to ask questions and to dig deeper into the customer. Yet, at the same time, if we walk in and the customer's unprepared or they're not in the mood or there's something else going on and we show up with our list of questions in our script, we can piss off the customer, we can catch them off guard. Certainly doesn't help us and our interests. You've got an awesome book, The Seller's Journey, that came out in 2024. And in it, you talk about how important it is to earn the right to ask questions, right? So walk us through, what does that mean? What does that look like in practice? And how can an account manager absorb that lesson?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it's really the same for sales, account managers, customer success. There's always a nuance to it, right? There's always, some context. But the goal is to establish this mutual level of trust. And our job in sales and even account management after they become a customer is we have to let our customers keep falling in trust with us, right? And the way we do that is through honesty and integrity and all those high level buzzwords, right? Tactically, what I do and I teach people to do is I teach them how to run what's called a respect contract, right? And there's digital forms and there's verbal forms. The digital form isn't just the calendar invite. Yes, you send a calendar invite with an agenda, but I also send an email. So if Alex, you and I are set to do something, I'll send an email to Alex, and in the subject line, it'll say proposed agenda, Alex and Richard account conversation, right? And I'll say, hey, Alex, looking forward to our call. I think these are the things we should be talking about. I want to make the best use of your time. So if there's something you want to make sure we cover, please feel free to add it. And I put 3 agenda items, again, as thinking like an account manager, it's system usage, challenges you're having with the system, future growth plans, right? Like that's the agenda, I think, of an account manager call for the most part, until you know more specifics about that account. So again, everybody listening, change that, but don't have more than 3 things and don't get into some big, long discussion, and you also let them know that it's a proposed agenda. If there's something else they want to cover, you tell me, right? Looking forward to speaking with you on Thursday at 5. If there's something you want to change or ask, feel free to do so. I look forward to talking to you. So in this digital respect contract, I've earned the right to ask questions around these things because I told them I'm going to ask questions around this stuff, right? Now then, you and I are going to get on the call on Friday, and I'm going to say, hey, Alex, good to talk to you. Hey, look, I know you're super busy, and I want to make good use of your time. I've got us down for 30 minutes. Does that still work? Alex will say yes. I'll say, great. Well, you know what I'm going to do, Alex? In 25 minutes, I'm just going to call a timeout. We're going to stop where we're at, and we're just going to assess where we are and see, if there's some things I need to do for you, or if there's some additional information I need to get from you. Does that work for you? Alex will say yes. It's like, great. Alex, you've been with us a long time, or I know you're just getting started with us, Alex. If at any point we're talking about something that's not relevant, please interrupt me. I don't need to waste your time hearing myself talk. I'm here to make sure that you're getting the best use and functionality out of what we offer you. And so I don't want to make any assumptions. And likewise, if you bring up something that's not relevant to how we do things or isn't the way we currently try to do things, I want to make sure we discuss that. And I'm going to be honest with you. If you're like, well, can your system do this? Well, until I hear what you ask, I don't know, but I do want to make sure that I make space for those conversations. Does that sound fair? Great. You're going to say yes. Great. So let's move forward. Let's start here. I might even turn it around and say, so Alex, based on, these 3 agenda items, where would you like to start? Give you control. So that to me is a respect contract, both digitally and verbally, that doesn't take a lot. It's meant to respect their time. It's meant to respect our time. And at the beginning, when I talk about that 5-minute timeout, I don't care what part of the business you're in. I don't care if you're in marketing or engineering. I can't tell you how many times I go to meetings where it's like, oh, you know what? I'll just email you tomorrow with the follow-up information. So that timeout is there to give you the time to figure out what your next steps are, right? Who owns what responsibility, to create an accountability plan. And so that's why I encourage people to put that at the very beginning of this respect contract. What I will also say, and I say this to people too, is when I'm teaching this is, you know, it's totally allowed for you to put a timer on your phone. Let the alarm go off, right? Like, why not let it go off, right? And let them hear it go off. And it's no big deal. Everybody's going to be like, oh, timer went off. We're at 25 minutes. What would you like to do, Alex? Like, you want to keep going or should we put a button in this, right? So anyway, that was a very long rant. I'm sorry.
Well, this is, I mean, what you're talking
that's
about
what you asked for. So I gave you the tactic.
What you're talking about is earning the right and building trust over time, right? So you're basically saying, here's what we're going to do, and boom, 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 and each step along the way is increasing credibility, building trust, helping them feel more comfortable, helping them feel like they're in control of the conversation. So you're not ambushing them, because one of the things that comes up a lot. In fact, this happened on a call that we were doing today within the Amplify account manager community. Is, people said, sometimes I show up and I was told to ask all these great big, rainmaker questions of my customer, and, they don't know the answers or they weren't prepared to have the discussion. Right. And so what happens then is, I don't look like, I look kind of silly if I do that. And the customer doesn't respond well because they feel like I've just dropped this on them without any prep.
Right. So that's a leadership management issue of that account manager. That leader and management is so far distanced from the real world that they don't deserve to be a leader. If the leader's making their reps do things that are uncomfortable, that means that leader doesn't understand the process, or the process needs to be changed, right? So now, as an account manager, we have to take some accountability to this too, right? And we have to step in and say, hey, Alex, sending an email. Hey, Alex, before we have this meeting next week, these are the things I'd like to cover, right? And then what would you like to cover? But if you wait to just drop a bombshell on them in a meeting, partially the account manager needs to own that. And leadership needs to own that that's not how it works. And if leadership hasn't taught them to send an email before you ask those questions, well, that's just piss poor leadership, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's just terrible leadership. Because
part of the issue is that, this is a big reason why we have this podcast, and big reason why we're doing the Amplify community is there's so little training out there for account managers, right? There's tons of stuff on go-to-market and sales AEs and marketing, and there's a lot of stuff for customer success. There's very little for the account management crowd. And so that's what we're trying to solve. And getting to the customer need is an incredibly important thing for an account manager to do, because what you learn as an account manager is going to be totally different than what they told you during the sales cycle, right? In the sales cycle, the customer says, here's my needs, here's my pain. And then they become the customer and they're like, here's what's actually going on within the business. Like, here's what things really look like on the ground. What are your tips for uncovering need, what are the best questions to ask? Like, how do you approach this? I know you have systems and frameworks for this, but like, how does someone start once they say, all right, now I'm ready to start asking these questions and going deeper?
Yeah. So once I've run a respect contract, right, and I've established we're going to talk about these topics, I always try to ask for real world scenarios, situational things that are use case driven, right? I want to ask, hey, Sarah, when you first started using our services, your goal was to accomplish this within the use of our service with your customers or internally at your organization. How is that going? What do you wish we could do better to support your initiatives? Right? I want to get into use case and case study specific conversations, right? I don't want to hear what keeps you up at night these days, right? I don't want to hear particularly that phrase. I might rephrase it and say, hey, what's happening now that maybe wasn't happening 6 months ago that we should be talking about? And I'm trying to create a conversation around an instance of some experience. I might shift it to say, they might be like, well, nothing's changing. Okay, well, what's on board for the next 6 months? What are the new projects coming on board? What are the things that might become a distraction from utilizing us? Right? How's everybody else on the team liking the tool or the service? So I'm trying to get into very, very use case specific scenarios based on the account managers, what I perceive the account manager is responsible for asking for. So it could be people are listening to this going, well, that's kind of not exactly what the account manager looks for, Richard. Well, if that's the case, then, try to find your use case scenario. Like I'm willing to admit that I've got ideas, but sometimes it doesn't always sort of translate. So,
Well, I mean, one of the ones that I always like to try is when we met 6 months ago or 3 months ago, XYZ was a priority. Is that still the
mm-hmm,
case? What else? What has changed
mm-hmm,
around that? Has anything leapfrogged
mm-hmm,
that in terms of your
mm-hmm.
priority list?
Well, I like the
Because
leapfrog thing. That's
because
good.
if you think about that, if you approach it like you were saying about what keeps you up at night or what are your goals, like those are too big, right? They're not specific enough. They're too and by the way, you sound like everybody else if you ask that
Mm-hmm,
stuff.
mm-hmm.
If on the other hand you can get as specific as possible, like really try to go into it and say, look, we have some background knowledge. I'm not showing up here asking you the absolute basics. We've been working together for X amount of time. Let's make sure we are refining this together. Then I found that to be a lot more effective. You?
Totally agree. 100%. So you've got to be authentic to yourself and be authentic to your customers. And that to me is the key.
Now you've got in your book, you've got the NEAT selling, NEAT selling framework. Walk us through that. It's a great tool for analyzing and understanding sales opportunities and walking through a framework. But how would that apply to an account manager?
Yeah. So I think it's all relative. It's all the same with context applied, right? So in some cases, this is not meant to be a sales process or a sales methodology. In many cases, it's a philosophy, right? So, need in for neat is, need. What are their needs? Which again are very use case specific. The E is around the economic impact, right? What's the economic impact of that need? And I don't mean saving time, making you more effective or efficient. Like that, those are buzzwords, right? I want to get in behind that. I want to get into the details of that. Okay, well, how much time does it take you to do this? Okay, how many people are spending their time on this? Because now all of a sudden I could double or triple the amount of time. Okay, if you were able to reduce that time by 70%, 50%, 30%, what would your team be doing with that extra time? Okay, with that, what does that extra time now yield in terms of more revenue? So everything I want to do around economic impact is finding a way to dollarize it, right? Because there is a hard cost to saving time. Okay, well, that's going to cost you this much. Well, then there's the opportunity cost, right? Well, what can't you get done, right? If you can't service, you know, 4 more accounts, Well, and you got 20 reps. Well, that's 80 accounts that aren't getting serviced. What's the economic impact of that? Now you got a big problem. Or if you could increase the service, all 20 reps could now handle 4 more accounts. What's the economic impact of that? Right? That's what you're trying to get to. That's where I encourage people to spend so much time on these use cases, because then you can dollarize them, not just from a time and efficiency perspective. That is part of the economic impact, but it's what do I do when I get the time back, and what's the value of that to my company and my
And
organization.
I want to just double click on the economic impact part before we finish Neat, because this is one of these things where we're all trained to go ask, what's the pain and how much is it costing you, and all this sort of stuff. And I want to encourage people to listen to what Richard is saying here and go further, go deeper. Like, take that, ask the follow-up question, get more specifics, get more details on this, because we can't take the surface level answer and assume that to be truth. We also can't necessarily assume that whoever we're talking to has the full picture and sees the full cost. And so part of the job of the account manager is to say, hey, Richard, I talked to Susie last week and she said XYZ. What would you add to that? Right. For example, and to bring some of these things together, and to pull the piece of the puzzle. Right.
I would even go further. Let's say Susie doesn't have all the answers. I might say, hey, Susie, I know you don't have all the answers. Just out of curiosity, if you go talk to Alex on your team, what are the things that Alex might bring up that maybe you and I aren't thinking about? Because sometimes Susie does know the answer. She doesn't realize it because she's only thinking about it from her own point of view, which is fine. We're humans. We're supposed to think that way to a certain degree. So as account managers and salespeople and revenue people, you can ask Susie what Alex's opinion might be, which is good for Susie to stop and think, good for me to hear what Alex's opinion might be. And if Susie's like, gosh, I don't know, well, that's good information for me to have too, because now I got to spend more time with Alex. Right. So there's all this context and nuance to this stuff.
Well, what's interesting, what's powerful about the economic impact question and approach is that it links back to something we've talked about a lot on this podcast in the past, which is tracking customer value. And, too often we don't have a good grip of what is the customer actually trying to solve with our product or with our service, and what's the cost of inaction, what's the savings that they've been able to get, what are their criteria for renewal or expansion with us, for example. That's all part of it. And if we can then start to put numbers on these things, then we can then say, here's the total cost, and here's how far we are in terms of solving that problem for you, solving that challenge. I've seen just far too many account managers shy away from these kind of conversations, either because they're not comfortable with numbers, or they're not sure they're actually moving the needle on them, or they're just haven't bothered to track this stuff. And I like the way this brings that all together.
Or their leadership sucks because they haven't taught them how to do it. If an account manager doesn't know how to do these things, right, that's on leadership's fault for not teaching it. And even if I hire an account manager that's 10 years in, guess what? It's called a pre-existing condition. You hired them. If they're not doing it the way you want, you train them. Like, that's the way it works. So I look, and now I'll flip it back again to the account manager. If you're not doing these things, you have to step up and go find out this knowledge. Listen to this podcast, right? Join this community, join another community, find a mentor, read a book, whatever. You own a responsibility to get better yourself. It's not going to be, hand fed to you, spoon fed to you, whatever the phrase is. So
both. Yeah. And then look, the not to go too far down on this rant, but the leadership vacuum in this area is real. And there just aren't that many leaders who truly understand the power of a great account management team to spin profits, to spin growth, to spin advocacy within your clients, and to really make the whole flywheel work. And, as a result, a lot of companies are not performing at the level that they could be, simply because they underinvest in this area.
100%.
Okay, let's get back to Neat. So needs, economic impact.
A is about access to authority, right? It's very rare that we always get to the authority figure, right? Particularly in sales. And we have to determine What level of access do I have with the person I'm talking to? Can Alex get me a meeting with the Pope? I don't know. So that's up to, me to figure out. Now, here's what I will tell you is that you don't need to know who the decision maker is all the time. You need to know who the skeptics are.
Who can torpedo the deal?
Right. So it's kind of like, hey, and look, everything's a consensus buy. Nobody's expanding, right? There's no add-ons or expansion sales without consensus. So I know if I'm talking to Alex and Alex is my internal contact, I know Alex has got to go talk to some people. So, rather than saying, Alex, should we get so-and-so on the phone? Be like, hey, Alex, I know when you get off this call, you're going to go talk to your boss, your team to get their opinion. Just out of curiosity, who's the most skeptical person on that team and what are they skeptical about? Because I could care less who makes the decision. I'm not getting to that person until I get through these skeptics. Oftentimes, the skeptic is the decision maker. But the person I asked the question to doesn't realize they just gave me the decision maker's name. And I'm not doing it to be manipulative. I really am asking who is the skeptic and what are they trying to be skeptical about? This just becomes, a nice side effect of asking that kind of a question.
Yeah,
So that's A for access to authority.
So when I talk to account managers about access to authority, there's two issues that come up all the time, right? Because in account plans, they'll pull out their org charts or their contact maps or what have you. And there's two things that routinely come up when it comes to this. Number one is we're talking to too few people, right? So I've got a contact list, I've got 15 people on the org chart, and I know two of them, right? Type of idea. The other problem that always happens is I'm way too far down on the org chart. I'm talking to people who are nice and they like me and they return my calls and they answer my questions, but they do not have the authority that I'm going to need. Now that's a comfort zone issue for a lot of people, right? They're like, hey, I'm just going to stay here because it's my comfort zone and I'm not going to stretch. To your point, if I want to make a big impact, if I want to get a big deal, if I want to 10x my results with a customer, I've got to get out there outside of my comfort zone and go ask some of these questions like who's got friction, who are the blockers, what are they concerned about, type of thing. And
Yep,
ask
100%.
those direct.
Yes. And you have to find the right way to ask, hey, I'd love to talk to someone over in that department. Are you comfortable introducing me, or would you prefer I just go in blindly and not mention your name? Right. And they might say, well, I don't want you to do either. Okay. Well, then you got to ask that question. Okay. Sounds like you have some concerns about, making, sort of bringing something else up. Just so I understand, what is your concern about doing that? And you have to be willing to ask these questions. If you aren't, you're just doing yourself a disservice. Now, if you aren't because you're not comfortable, well, you're not comfortable because you're not used to doing it. You haven't practiced it. So practice. Practice it in the car ride, practice in the mirror, practice it in the shower, practice it. And then you're going to have to actually do it. Practice it with your boss. Say, hey, I want to go ask to get expansion into these other 4 departments. Can we role play it? That to me is like, you gotta take the bull by the horns on this stuff and kind of make it happen for yourself as an account manager. Yes, I can blame leadership, but you gotta want it.
The number of times I've seen account managers blow the chance to be with their, when they're with their customer, they're with the top person, C-suite person, and they're talking about the weather or the sports or the whatever it is. And it's like, you guys, you've got an open goal here. You can ask the question, do it. And they're deflecting and they're not taking that chance. I think it's a huge missed opportunity for so many people.
Yep. 100%.
All right. So what about T?
Timeline. T is timeline, right? Same thing everywhere, right? What is the timeline like? And the key piece is when I talk about timeline, so many times when I talk about this and I ask people how they qualify timeline, they do the reverse engineer. Oh, you want to be in by June 1st? Well, then we need to back up and go from here to here to here to here. And that's okay, but that's not good enough. Like for me, my next question when Alex gives me June 1st, I'll be like, great, Alex, what happens if we don't get this done by June 1st? what happens to your business if you don't get in line by June 1st? And if there's no real repercussion, well, we'll just wait till July. It's not really an answer I want to hear, but at least I got an answer. That would also indicate that I didn't do enough discovery around economic impact to drive that urgency. Economic impact drives urgency. Nothing drives urgency more than money. Nothing. So that's the first thing. What happens if you don't accomplish this by the 1st? What happens to your business? Well, then I can start to reverse engineer it. And in there, I will also say, well, gosh, based on that economic impact, you'd mentioned it was, if we don't get this done by June 1st, it's going to cost you $250,000 a month. Okay, so June 1st is a really hard deadline for us, right? And, they might say yes. They might say, well, we could float it for, it could be Visa and, $250,000 a month theoretically may not mean a lot to Visa. It might mean it to that person who's in that department, but, but we need to ask these questions. Like we need to be comfortable asking uncomfortable questions. And the piece that I'll share, rather than, because I know I'm coming off very lectury and I'm all on my soapbox. When you start to ask these questions, two things happen. One, you start to get answers. That's good. The other part, which really matters to me most, is that we feel better about the job we're doing. Like, hey, I'm doing my job well. I like doing my job well. I can sleep better at night because I'm asking these questions. When my boss comes and asks me about economic impact or why we're not doing it this way, well, it's because of this. And it's not to create friction or confrontation between reps and bosses, right? I want people to be able to go to bed at night trying different things because you can feel better about yourself trying something you've never tried before. Right? And so of all the things I've talked about today, I don't think, I just want people to find one thing to try tomorrow of the different ideas I've given. Don't try to do all of them. Don't try to do a respect contract and ask for the skeptic. And tomorrow, maybe just ask for the skeptic one time. That's it. Just do one thing and see how that feels when you get an answer to that. So, because you can only do things one little thing at a time. Like to me, that's the important piece. So, and I want people to walk out of here with something they feel like they can use.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, and the account management role in my experience has got a lot of it's got a lot of pros and cons to it. But one of the things that a lot of people feel is it's frustrating to be doing this stuff and get very little credit when things go well, and get lots of blame and
oh yeah.
When things go poorly. Like as soon as the customer churns, oh, it's the account manager's fault. If the customer renews, then everything, everyone just keeps going on as though nothing happened. And so I call the account managers the unsung heroes of GTM teams, because of that, right? They really are unsung because they don't get the recognition that they deserve. But to your point, if you can go out there as an account manager and you start seeing progress and you start building trust, then you feel like you're making an impact. When you feel like you're making an impact, your confidence grows. You're able to do more stuff. You're able to expand your skills and abilities, and you're able to get more stuff done. And so I like this idea that just pick one thing, go out there and give it a try, see how it works, revise it as needed. I mean, I think that building resilience is such an important skill for account managers, right? Like there's so much out there that's in their way. They've got friction with their customers, and amazingly, they have frictions with their internal teams, right? Where people are like, I don't know what these guys do all day, right? So it's so important to be resilient. Do you agree? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think resilience is there. And look, any part of the revenue organization where you're customer facing requires a certain level of resilience. And you have to be willing to put your neck out to a certain extent, and you have to be willing to be wrong. Right. And I think you have to be willing to try things. You don't become more resilient by doing the same thing over and over again. You become more resilient because you try something and you adjust. Right. That to me is where that happens. And sales and account management and customer success, you can get to that part of your career where you're coasting, right? Where you're just you're happy making your paycheck, you're doing well, that's fine. And that's okay. Like that's okay. But if you want to be better, then you have to take ownership of that. Right. And I do think companies, own a piece of making you better. But if they're not doing it and helping you, then you got to go do it yourself. And and part of doing it yourself might be finding a new company. Like that could be that like honestly, right? That could be part of it. So, but don't try to boil the ocean with all this, right? Find one thing to do, right? And those one thing begets a next, and that's where resilience comes in, right? You don't ask about the skeptic one time. You do it with 5 or 6 customers. Then you make a decision as to whether or not you like that question. Right? You don't try a respect contract once, because I guarantee you it's going to sound terrible the first 2 or 3 times. You try it 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 times, because you're going to refine it each time. You're going to hear yourself out loud and go, "Ooh, I don't like that. I'm going to adjust that part." Well, that's resilience too. Resilience also comes from within, not just external.
So psychological safety, we know, is really important for teams to be able to flourish and grow. You have to be okay sticking your neck out, being wrong, just as long as it's in pursuit of the bigger goal or the bigger vision. How can leaders create that type of environment? How can they create that type of culture while also being aware of the fact that, at the end of the day, this is about bookings and revenue and renewals and profits and hard numbers. Do you have any thoughts on how to create a culture of psychological safety there for folks?
Well, I think you have to give yourself and your team the space and grace to do things, right? And you have to lead with vulnerability, right? Leading with vulnerability doesn't mean coming in and talking about the hardest day you've had in your life. That sometimes can be leading with vulnerability, right? Sometimes leading with vulnerability is being vulnerable enough to just shut up and ask for questions, like, "Hey, Alex, and everybody on the team, send this out to your team if you're a leader. Hey, everybody, one of the things I want to do on the one-on-ones this week, I want to give everybody 10 minutes, and I'm going to ask you all one question. I want y'all to think about it. What's one thing I could do better as a leader?" If I get that vulnerable with my team and I hear that candidly coming back from my team and I make the adjustments, well, now they're going to feel safer about being vulnerable about the things they need to improve. They're going to be willing to take my suggestions as advice, and they don't have to implement them, but they know that I also walk the walk and talk the talk, and that I was vulnerable first. I was the first person to say, "I don't know everything." I was the first person to say, "Help me get better to help, so I can help y'all." Like, that's how I think you create safety in the culture of the organization, that it's a safe space to be vulnerable. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it's also a clear show of commitment. I'm committed to the process. I'm committed to getting better. I'm committed to the team. All that comes across when you do this kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let me get your thoughts on a couple more things. There's a big discussion these days around customer success and account management teams coexisting, how they coexist within a company. I know you've done all sorts of work with companies large and small. What are where are you seeing people go with this conversation when you think about the entire go-to-market teams comprised of SDRs, BDRs, AEs, and then you've got account managers and customer success doing post sales and customer service, customer support, like a really broad group. Where's the thinking leading us to as it relates to post sales?
Talking to someone who leads customer success and account management teams might have a better answer. So I'll throw my answer out there knowing that I don't know. And the answer is it all has to be centered around the customer experience. What's going to give the best experience to your customer? Right? I talk about this in the book. There's no such thing as a buyer's journey. There's only a buyer's experience through the seller's journey. Right? We create the journey.
Because we're leading it, we're guiding
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Right. The only place there's a buyer's journey might be they decide to Google the problem. However, before they Google the problem, they had some experience that made them want to Google the problem. Right. So that to me is, it all comes down to the customer experience and what works well within that organization to give your customer the best experience. And where do you get that information? Talking to your customers. Now, who owns that? Is it customer success? Is it account management? Is it, who is it the sales team? Is it the VP of sales? Kind of feels like a CRO question, right? It feels like that's a place where the CRO could try to insert themselves with customers, which I also think creates a lot of validity and care and helps on the renewal process of, wow, the CRO wants to know what my experience is like because he wants to help make it better. Right. So that to me in this conversation right now feels like the right approach, but I don't know that I'm the best one to answer it. So I'd be curious if people, if you got other answers to that.
We'll hear what they all have to say. And on that line, I'd also love to hear, what's your sense of this emerging CCO, Chief Customer Officer role?
I mean, I think it's good. I think every time there's a new role, it feels like we're splitting hairs, right? I remember when the SDR came out, and then it became the BDR, and then there's SDRs and their BDRs, right? Then there's AEs, and then there's sales engineers, and now there's account managers and customer success. Like my second client ever was Gainsight. They had 15 employees, right? Dumbest mistake I made was not to take options as part of my payment with Gainsight. So anyway, so I've seen this grow. If you can define the role very specifically of what a CCO does versus a CRO versus any other title,
VP
then
of
I'm all
strategic
for
accounts.
it. Right.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. But if you're just overlapping stuff, right, then it's, now you're just becoming, the government with too much redundancy, right? And now you're going to have a bunch of mediocre people doing mediocre work, right? All for the sake of their salary and their options and their big exit strategy. So again, if you can define why you need that role and what's not getting done because that role doesn't exist, then you can build the role. If you don't know what that person is going to do or what's not getting done because the role doesn't exist, then you shouldn't be creating that role.
Yeah. Just because you have a churn problem doesn't mean you need a CCO.
Right. Not yet. Right. It could be that your head of customer success or account management need to figure that out. Right. And, or part of me thinks that that's part of the CRO's job. He's the chief revenue officer. Right. But again, I could be swayed in either direction because it depends on the context, the size of your company, how many people you have, how many customers you have, how many departments you have doing this, what's the average deal size. Like there's a lot of nuance to this so that it doesn't always need to fall under a CRO. It might start there. I might have a director of customer experience before I go create a chief customer experience officer.
Right. Got it. Okay. So I just want to bring it around and wrap up here. We talked through a whole number of different ideas for account managers, and we talked through things like building the respect contract, the neat selling framework, which is in the book, The Seller's Journey. And one of the things that you said that I think makes a ton of sense is, don't try to do everything, right? Like, don't go buy a copy of the book and like immediately turn around and say, I'm going to do all these things tomorrow. You said, let's focus on one, right? Get good at one, see what works, see what doesn't work, see what you want to refine. In your experience, what is the easiest thing to get started with? Like, what's the one thing that's going to help more account managers handle a sticky situation or something that's got friction today? And if you just say, hey, just do one thing, what would that be?
Well, there's a difference between the best one and the easiest one. The easiest one is to ask the skeptic question. It's like, it's one thing. It's like, it's a question, like put it on a Post-it and put it on your screen. Like that's easy. My opinion is that the respect contract is the most important thing. How do I initiate conversations is the most important thing. How do I set the tone of that meeting so that I'm in control, but I'm not manipulating the situation. And the customer feels like they have a lot of control over where the conversation goes. And the respect contract does that. That to me is it. It's also something you have to put some effort into, right? If you read it or you listen to it on the audiobook, it's all written out for you, like it's step by step by step, but you got to go practice it because it's about 2 minutes of dialogue, and it's a back and forth dialogue, so it's not a Shakespearean soliloquy, but you got to practice it. So it's a little harder than the skeptic question, but to me, that's where it starts.
So that's the invitation to our dear listeners: is start with trying to figure out how to implement the respect contract into what you're doing. That's going to be the thing to most establish credibility and build trust right at the get-go. And if you get good at it, you can then build from there.
Yeah. I'll even go this much further. If you go buy my book on Amazon or wherever, The Seller's Journey, and you don't like it, I'll send you your money back. I'm the only sales book with a money back guarantee. Like people laugh when I say, I'm like, yeah, look, it costs you $11. If you buy my book and you don't like it, I'll send you $11 back. I don't need yes, I want the money, but I'm not riding off into the sunset, making a movie out of the sales book. Believe me.
Right on. Well, that's a fantastic offer. Thanks, Richard, for being here. Check out Harris Consulting Group for more info, and definitely recommend checking out The Seller's Journey, the book. Thanks so much for joining me on Account Management Secrets.
All right, man. Thanks, Alex. It was good to hang out with you and chat with you. Thank you. Thank you.